March 1945, Western Germany. A 22-year-old sergeant from Ohio is standing in the turret of his Sherman tank at the edge of a quiet German village. Every window has a white flag. The village looks like it has already given up. He has been in Europe for 11 months. He survived Normandy. He survived the Bulge. And in those 11 months, he has learned one thing above everything else. White flags do not always mean what they are supposed to mean. He lifts his binoculars, scans the windows, one by one, and then he sees it. Behind the white flag in the corner house, the outline of a rifle barrel. He does not shout. He does not raise the alarm. He keys his radio, calm, slow, and says one word. What happened next, and what General George Patton ordered in response, is a story that most Americans have never been told. To understand how the American Army arrived at this moment, you have to understand what kind of country they were driving into. You have to understand what Germany had become by the spring of 1945. And to understand that, you have to start not with soldiers, but with a radio broadcast. And not with American soldiers, but with a terrified old man in a farmer's cap sitting in a cold kitchen somewhere north of Frankfurt, listening to that broadcast in the dark. He is 63 years old. He has already lost 2 sons on the Eastern Front. The Nazi Party has issued him a rifle he does not fully know how to use and a title he never asked for. He is a soldier of the Volkssturm, the People's Storm, the last desperate levy of a nation that has already spent everything it had and is now reaching into the pockets of its oldest men and its youngest boys. He does not want to fight. He wants to go home to his wife. But the local party leader has been very clear. Any house that flies a white flag will be burned. Any man who lays down his weapon will be hanged. And the SS will be watching. So the old man sits in his kitchen with his rifle across his knees, listening to the radio, and he waits. The broadcast he is listening to calls itself Radio Werewolf. It opens every night with the sound of a howling wolf, then a children's voice reading a poem about vengeance and fire, and the eternal German people who will never surrender. Then the announcements, partisan attacks on American supply lines, the assassination of an American general, a bridge blown up behind enemy lines. The wolves are everywhere, the broadcast says. The war continues. Germany fights on. Surrender is betrayal. Peace is a lie. Every single word of it is fabricated. The man responsible for this broadcast is Joseph Goebbels, 47 years old, Reich Minister of Propaganda, operating out of a transmitter station at Nauen as the Soviet army closes in on Berlin from the east. Goebbels understands something that many military commanders do not. By the spring of 1945, Germany cannot be saved by weapons. It can only be prolonged by fear, and fear does not require an army. Fear only requires a microphone and a signal strong enough to reach every kitchen, every farmhouse, every cellar in the Reich, where frightened people are huddled around a radio, wondering whether they dare hang a white flag from their window. The target audience of Radio Werewolf is not the Americans. It is the Germans. Behind the propaganda, there is a real operation, or at least something intended to be one. His name is Hans Prutzmann. He is 43 years old, SS Obergruppenführer, one of the highest ranks in Heinrich Himmler's black uniformed empire. He is not a battlefield commander. He is a bureaucrat of death. In Ukraine in 1941 and 1942, he oversaw the murder of tens of thousands of Jewish men, women, and children. He organized it the way a factory manager organizes a production line, efficiently, methodically, without apparent emotion. Now, in the last winter of the Reich, Himmler has given him a new assignment. If the German army cannot stop the Allies at the front, Prutzmann will stop them behind the front. He will build a partisan force, an underground army, a network of saboteurs and assassins who will make the occupied territories ungovernable, who will keep fighting long after the official surrender, who will make the Americans and the British and the Soviets bleed for every inch of German soil they hold. Himmler gives the operation a name drawn from German folklore, werewolf. Prutzmann sets up his headquarters at a stone castle called Schloss Hülkrath, near the town of Erkelenz. He begins training his first recruits in the castle's stone halls. There are roughly 200 of them. Some are hardened SS veterans, but most are not. Most are boys from the Hitler Youth, 14 years old, 15, 16, children who have grown up inside the Nazi state and know nothing else who have been taught since they could walk that dying for Germany is the highest possible honor a human being can achieve. Kreutzmann teaches them how to make explosives from household materials, how to sabotage vehicles, how to conceal weapons inside civilian clothing, how to blend into a crowd of surrendering Germans and wait for a lone American soldier, wait for the moment, and strike. On the 19th of March, 1945, Adolf Hitler signs an order. History will remember it as the Nero Decree, named after the Roman emperor who, legend says, played his lyre while his own city burned around him. The order is short, it is precise, and it is monstrous. Every railway, every bridge, every factory, every power station, every waterworks, every telephone exchange, everything of value inside the borders of the Reich is to be destroyed. The retreating German forces are not to leave behind a single resource that could benefit the advancing enemy. If the German people cannot achieve final victory, the decree states, then the German people have proven themselves unworthy of survival. The future belongs to the stronger Eastern nations. The German people have failed their Führer, and they deserve nothing. Hitler is 56 years old. He has not slept properly in months. He is living in a concrete bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, running a war he has already lost on maps that no longer reflect reality, surrounded by generals who tell him what he wants to hear, because telling him the truth has become a potentially fatal act. He signs the decree. He goes back to his maps. The decree is distributed, and somewhere in a small town in the Rhineland, Albert Speer, Hitler's own Minister of Armaments, reads it and immediately begins trying to quietly sabotage its implementation, because Speer, unlike his Führer, understands that Germany will still exist after the war ends, and that the German people will need railways and bridges and power stations to survive. But not every German officer is Albert Speer. 3 days after the Nero Decree, on the night of the 22nd of March, 1945, elements of Patton's Third Army slip across the Rhine River at Oppenheim. They cross in wooden assault boats, in the dark, without artillery preparation, without air support, without asking anyone's permission. By dawn, 6 battalions are on the eastern bank. Patton has beaten Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery across the Rhine by a full 24 hours. Montgomery, who has spent weeks preparing an enormous, methodical, heavily supported crossing with hundreds of artillery pieces and thousands of paratroopers, will not go until the following night. Patton knows exactly what he has done. He picks up the telephone. He calls General Omar Bradley, and in a voice loud enough to be heard across the room by everyone present, he says, "Brad, for God's sake, tell the world we're across." This is George S. Patton, Jr., at 59 years old, 41 years a soldier, a man of contradictions so extreme they should not fit inside a single human being. He is deeply religious and shockingly profane. He weeps at poetry and curses like a longshoreman. He carries a Bible into battle and reads it every night. He believes with complete sincerity that he has fought in previous lives, that he stood at Troy, that he rode with Napoleon's cavalry at Waterloo, that the souls of the ancient dead march beside him as his tanks roll through the Roman city of Trier. He is also, by the assessment of nearly every commander who served alongside him, the most effective offensive general the United States Army has ever produced. His Third Army has covered more ground, taken more prisoners, and liberated more territory in less time than any comparable force in the history of American warfare. He is also, as the next 3 weeks will prove, a man capable of catastrophic, almost incomprehensible personal recklessness. But that comes later. First, the flags. On the 25th of March, Colonel Creighton Abrams leads his tanks into the Palatinate. Abrams is 30 years old. Short, barrel-chested, a pipe clenched permanently between his teeth, he commands the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, and Patton himself has called him the finest tank commander in the United States Army. He has fought from the beaches of Normandy to the frozen roads outside Bastogne. He has seen every kind of enemy the Wehrmacht can put on a battlefield. But now, rolling into a Rhineland village in the late morning light, he sees something new. Every house has a white flag. The village square is empty. The doors are closed. No civilians visible. No German soldiers. No panzers. No anti-tank guns. Nothing. Abrams halts the column. He waits. 10 minutes pass. 20. And then from a barn on the edge of the village, a single shot rings out. A rifle shot. A small caliber round fired by someone who has clearly never fired at a human being before, it misses everything. It ricochets off the cobblestones and disappears into the tree line. Abrams does not order an infantry assault. He does not send scouts to surround the building. He does not call for artillery. He simply turns and signals to the tank commander behind him. The turret rotates. The gun fires. The barn ceases to exist. His men wait. There is no return fire. When they finally approach the smoking ruin, they find one body. Not an SS officer, not a trained sniper, not a werewolf operative from Prutzmann's castle. A boy, 14 years old, maybe 15. A Hitler Youth armband on his sleeve. A single-shot rifle in his hands. Nobody speaks. Nobody makes a joke. The tankers look at each other for a long moment and climb back into their machines. The column moves on. This is the first thing the history books leave out. The thing the newsreels never showed and the post-war movies never depicted. The white flag ambushes were almost never the work of fanatical SS killers. They were almost never orchestrated assassinations by trained werewolf operatives. The intelligence files, declassified decades after the war and sitting now in boxes at the National Archives in Washington, are clear on this point. The ambushes behind white flags were the work of terrified boys and old men. Volkssturm conscripts who had been handed rifles and pointed toward the American advance. Hitler Youth teenagers who had been told their families would be executed if they fled. Grandfathers who had survived one world war only to be dragged into a second one at an age when they should have been sitting in their gardens. Men who did not choose to fight, men who were given no alternative, and yet they fired, and men died. And the Sherman tanks rolled forward, and the white flags kept appearing in windows. And the question of what those flags actually meant became the most dangerous question in the war. 2 days after Abrams and his column moved through that village, 40 miles further east, an American reconnaissance patrol enters another town. This one has also surrendered. This one has also raised the white flags. But when the American patrol reaches the town square, they stop, because hanging from a lamppost is the body of a German soldier. His uniform is Wehrmacht. His boots have been taken. His pockets have been emptied. And around his neck, tied with a piece of wire, is a rectangle of cardboard. On it, written in careful German handwriting, are 5 words. Ich war zu feige zu kämpfen. I was too cowardly to fight. Beneath the body, nailed to the post, a smaller sign reads, by order of the Flying Court Marschall, the Fliegende Standgerichte, SS execution squads, roving the countryside in the final weeks of the war, hunting down German soldiers who tried to surrender, hanging them from lampposts and church steeples, leaving the bodies there for days as a warning to every other German who might be thinking about raising a white flag. The Americans stand in the square in silence, looking up at the dead man. And in that silence, the full shape of the catastrophe becomes visible for the first time. Germany in the spring of 1945 is not one country anymore. It is 2. One Germany is trying desperately to end the killing. The other Germany is murdering anyone who tries. And the advancing American army is walking straight into the boundary between them, where every village could be a genuine surrender or a trap, where every white flag is a question with potentially fatal answer, and where every decision made in the next 30 seconds could be the last decision a 22-year-old sergeant from Ohio ever made. The boys of the Third Army are not at war with Germany anymore. They are at war with ghosts. And 3 days from now, the man who commands them, General George S. Patton, is going to receive an intelligence report that will make everything worse. A report about a prison camp 60 miles behind enemy lines. A report about 1,500 American prisoners. And a report about one specific name on the prisoner list. A name that Patton recognizes, because the man bearing that name is married to his daughter. On the 25th of March, 1945, a report arrives at 3rd Army headquarters. It moves through the intelligence chain the way all reports move, typed on thin paper, stamped, initialed, passed from desk to desk. But when it reaches the right set of eyes, it stops moving, because buried in the operational language, beneath the coordinates and the unit designations and the prisoner count estimates, is a name. Lieutenant Colonel John Knight Waters, captured in Tunisia in 1943, currently held at Aflag 13B, a German prisoner of war camp near the Bavarian town of Hammelburg. 60 miles behind the current German front line, 60 miles into territory that no American force has yet entered. Patton reads the name. He reads it again. John Nightwaters is 38 years old, West Point graduate, career Army officer, and for the past several years, he has been married to Patton's daughter, Beatrice. He is Patton's son-in-law. What happens next is one of the most controversial decisions made by any American commander in the entire war. And it does not happen in a conference room. It does not happen after careful consultation with Eisenhower or Bradley. It does not happen through the normal chain of command, where plans are reviewed and risks are weighed, and men in comfortable headquarters buildings push pins across maps and calculate acceptable losses. It happens fast, it happens quietly, and it happens in the way that most of Patton's decisions happen, which is to say it happens before anyone can tell him no. The morning after the report arrives, Patton summons a young captain named Abraham Baum to his headquarters. Baum is 24 years old. He is from the Bronx, New York. Before the war, he worked in the garment district as a pattern maker in a blouse factory. He is tall and thin and quiet with the kind of stillness that some men carry when they have already seen enough combat to understand that panic is a luxury they cannot afford. He has fought his way across France and into Germany. He is good at his job, but he has never commanded anything larger than a company. He has never been asked to do anything like what Patton is about to ask him to do. Patton tells him to take 300 men and fight 60 miles into the heart of the Third Reich. He tells him the camp holds approximately 300 American prisoners. The real number is nearly 1,500. Whether Patton's intelligence was genuinely wrong, or whether he knew the true figure and chose not to share it, historians have argued for 80 years and have reached no definitive conclusion. What is certain is that Abraham Baum crosses the line of departure believing he is going after 300 men and discovers too late that he has been sent to rescue 5 times that number with a force 1/5 the size he would have needed. Task Force Baum, 294 men, 16 tanks, a mix of Shermans and light Stuarts, 27 half-tracks, 3 self-propelled guns, a column roughly a mile long on a narrow German road pointed east into the dark. At 10 minutes past 8 on the evening of the 26th of March, they cross the line of departure at Schweinheim. They immediately run into an ambush. German defenders, a mix of regular Wehrmacht and Volkssturm, have positioned themselves along the road with anti-tank guns and machine guns. The firefight in the dark is brief and confused and costly. Task Force Baum loses men before they have traveled a single mile. They fight through it. They keep moving. Because the one thing Baum understands about this mission is that stopping is not an option. Stopping means being surrounded. Stopping means being destroyed. The only thing keeping 294 men alive inside Germany is momentum. By dawn on the 27th, they are deep behind enemy lines. The roads twist through the Spessart Hills, narrow and fog-covered in the morning hours, lined with dark pine forest on both sides. Villages appear and disappear. Some show white flags. Some show nothing. Some show white flags in the front, and, as the column discovers twice in the first morning, hide panzer teams in the buildings at the rear. Every mile costs them something. A half-track hit by a Panzerfaust rocket and left burning on the road. 2 men dead at a river crossing where someone forgot to mention the bridge had been blown. A tank immobilized by a mine on a dirt path that the maps insisted was a paved road. And somewhere in the first few hours, Captain Abraham Baum is shot. A round enters his right thigh and exits the other side. The medic wants to stop. Baum refuses. He binds the wound himself with the methodical focus of a man who has decided that his own body is simply a problem to be managed and not a reason to stop moving. He stays in his vehicle. He keeps driving. He keeps giving orders over the radio in a voice that does not waver, because the one thing 294 men need from the person commanding them, deep inside Germany with no support and no retreat route, is the sound of someone who has not yet given up. By nightfall on the 27th, they reach Hammelburg. There is a battle. It is short and violent and costs them more vehicles and more men. But they break through, they reach the camp, they blow open the gates, and the American prisoners come pouring out. Men who have been behind wire for months, some for years. Men who are thin in a way that speaks not just of hunger, but of a sustained and grinding deprivation, of cold and uncertainty, and the particular psychological erosion that comes from not knowing whether you will ever see your family again. They weep. They embrace the boys of Task Force Bomb. They grab the hands of men they have never met and hold on. For approximately 45 minutes, in a field in Bavaria in the dark, there is something that feels almost like a miracle. And then Lieutenant Colonel John Knight Waters walks toward the gate. He is 38 years old. He has been a prisoner for 2 years. He walks slowly, carrying a white cloth, holding it up in the universal gesture of parley, the signal that means, I am unarmed, I am coming in peace, do not fire. A German guard, somewhere in the darkness beyond the perimeter, does not recognize the gesture, or does not care. He raises his rifles and fires once. Waters goes down. The bullet enters his pelvis. He does not die, but he cannot walk. He cannot be moved without a stretcher. He will not be leaving Hammelburg under his own power tonight or any other night in the near future. The man that Patton sent 294 soldiers 60 miles into Germany to rescue is lying on the ground 20 yards from the open gate. And then Baum, bleeding from his thigh, standing at the entrance to a prison camp in the middle of the night, looks around at the men streaming through the gates and understands the full dimension of what Patton did not tell him. There are not 300 prisoners in this camp. There are 1,500. He does not have the vehicles to carry them. He does not have the fuel. He does not have the men. He counts his operational tanks. He counts his remaining half-tracks. He runs the numbers in his head the way a man runs numbers when the answer is going to be terrible and he already knows it. He cannot bring them all home. By dawn on the 28th, the Germans have surrounded what is left of Task Force Bomb. Panzers come out of the tree line to the north. Assault guns appear on the ridge to the east. Regular Wehrmacht infantry moves to cut off the roads to the west. It is a textbook encirclement, and there is nothing Baum can do about it because he is 24 years old and he is wounded and he is out of options in a field outside Hammelburg with no air support, no artillery, no relief column coming, and 1,500 men who cannot fight looking at him for a way out that does not exist. Task Force Bomb is destroyed, not defeated, destroyed. The vehicles are burning. The men are dead or captured or scattered into the forest, trying to make it back to American lines on foot through 60 miles of enemy territory. Baum is captured. Waters is captured again, loaded onto a German vehicle, his wound still untreated, and taken back into the camp he was liberated from 18 hours ago. Of the 294 men who crossed the line of departure at Schweinheim, 35 will eventually make it back to American lines. Most of them on foot, many of them wounded. 259 men do not come home. Patton is summoned to see Eisenhower. The meeting is not written down in the official record. There is no transcript, no formal memorandum. But we know what Eisenhower said because Patton wrote it in his diary that night. Eisenhower told him he had committed a serious error in judgment. He told him he had endangered the lives of nearly 300 American soldiers for personal reasons. He told him that if he ever undertook an unauthorized operation of this kind again, his career as a commander was finished. Patton writes in his diary that he did not argue. He did not offer excuses. He did not blame his intelligence officers or point out that the mission on paper was operationally sound. He writes only one line, "Perhaps I was wrong." 3 words from a man who spent 41 years never admitting he was wrong about anything. 3 words that contain, if you read them carefully, the whole weight of 259 men who are not coming home. 5 days later, March 30th, 1945, 60 miles to the north of Hammelburg, on a dark road outside the German city of Paderborn. Major General Maurice Rose is 45 years old. He is the son of a rabbi from Denver, Colorado. He commands the 3rd Armored Division of the 1st Army, and he is one of only 2 Jewish division commanders in the entire United States military. He is a soldier's soldier. His men worship him because he leads from the front, literally from the front, riding in his command vehicle at the tip of the spear rather than coordinating from a safe distance behind the lines. Tonight, his column is racing to close the Ruhr pocket. 300,000 German troops are about to be encircled. If the Americans can close the trap before the Germans reorganize, the war in the West ends not in weeks, but possibly in days. Rose's command vehicle turns a corner on a dark country road and finds itself face to face with a German Tiger tank. The tank belongs to one of the last German armored units still fighting in the area. The tank commander, a Wehrmacht sergeant, stands in the open turret holding an MP-40 submachine gun. He shouts at Rose to surrender. He is looking at the general's vehicle, at the stars on the bumper, at the rank insignia on Rose's collar, and he understands that he has accidentally captured something valuable. Rose reaches for his holster. He is not drawing his weapon. He is unbuckling the strap to remove his sidearm and hand it over. It is the correct thing to do. It is what the rules of war require. A surrendering officer presents his weapon to the enemy. Rose has his hand on the holster clasp. The German sergeant raises the MP-40 and fires 3 times at point-blank range. Maurice Rose is dead before he hits the ground. He falls in the ditch beside his vehicle on a country road outside Paderborn, 16 days before the concentration camps, where people who share his ancestry were being murdered, are liberated by the army he commanded. Within hours, Radio Werewolf goes on the air. The Howling Wolf, the children's poem, and then the announcement. Werewolf partisans have assassinated the American general. It is a complete fabrication. Rose was killed by a regular Wehrmacht tank commander in a regular military engagement. There was no werewolf involvement. There was no assassination. There was a dark road and a surprise sergeant and a terrible misunderstanding that lasted less than 3 seconds. But the lie spreads. Newspapers print it. Soldiers hear it and believe it. And in the ranks of the Third Army, moving east through Bavaria, the fury reaches a temperature that no order and no directive can fully contain. These men have watched their friends die behind white flags. They have found German soldiers hanging from lampposts with cardboard signs around their necks. They have rolled past burned villages and blown bridges and the bodies of civilians who got in the way of the retreat. And now they are being told that a general has been assassinated by an underground army that the German government is openly bragging about on the radio. The white flags in the village windows are no longer just a tactical problem. They have become personal. At Third Army headquarters, Patton reads the report on Maurice Rose's death. He reads it once. He sets it down. He does not shout. He does not curse. He does not slam his fist on the table or make speeches about vengeance. He simply issues a directive. It is not the order that the legends describe. It is not a license to shoot civilians or execute surrendering soldiers. It is not the mythologized command that pulp histories of the war have invented and reinvented for 8 decades. It is something more careful than that, and in its own way, more devastating. Any house or building from which a shot is fired after a white flag has been displayed is to be treated as a fortified enemy position. The legal obligation to protect that structure under the laws of war is immediately forfeit. Field commanders are authorized to reduce it by whatever means are available, including armor, including artillery, including air support. What Patton is doing is not inventing new rules. He is applying old ones. Article 23 of the Hague Convention of 1907, a document signed by 26 nations, including Germany, 38 years before this moment. The article that defines what military lawyers call perfidy, the deliberate use of a protected symbol, the white flag, the Red Cross emblem, the flag of truce, as a weapon of deception. The article that states, in plain language, that a combatant who commits perfidy forfeits every protection that the laws of war extend to soldiers. The Germans who fire from behind white flags are not covered by the Geneva Convention. They never were. Patton is not changing the rules of the war. He is simply, for the first time since the Third Army entered Germany, choosing to enforce them. The results are immediate. In a village in Bavaria, a column of Shermans halts in front of a farmhouse with a white flag hanging from the upper window. A machine gun opens up from the second floor. The tank commander does not dismount. He does not call for infantry. He does not shout a warning. He rotates his turret, and a single round from the Sherman's main gun goes through the corner of the building. The wall comes down. The machine gun stops. In another village, a church steeple has a white flag at the top and a sniper in the belfry. The infantry commander calls up a Sherman. The gun elevates. 3 high explosive rounds. The steeple is gone in 90 seconds. The bells fall through the roof and land in the nave of the church with a sound that the American gunners standing in the street below will carry with them for the rest of their lives. A sound that is not like anything else in the world. A sound that is both the end of something beautiful and the end of something dangerous, and which will not, in the years that follow, be possible to separate into those two things. The Americans are not enjoying this. There are no cheers. There are no celebrations. There are no men clapping each other on the back and talking about a job well done. The young soldiers of the Third Army, boys from Kansas and Georgia and Pennsylvania and 100 other places that look nothing like this, are learning what every army eventually learns in the final stages of a collapsing war. That survival requires decisions that do not get easier with time. They only get more necessary. 40 miles to the southwest of where the Sherman tanks are reducing church steeples to rubble, in a mid-sized German, the boys dying behind those white flags are. On the 3rd of April, 1945, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Major Emil Lamberth walks out of the ruins of Schloss Johannesburg in Aschaffenburg. His uniform is dirty, his boots are scuffed, but his medals are still on his chest, pinned exactly where they belong, and his head is held at the angle of a man who has decided that whatever else the world takes from him today, it will not take his posture. Behind him, on the twin towers of the castle, he swore to defend to the last stone. 2 white bed sheets flutter in the cold spring wind. The same kind of white flags his own men had been hanged for raising only days before. Lamberth walks across the rubble of what had once been a city. He passes the lamppost in the main square, where Lieutenant Heinz Hammann's body had hung for days with a cardboard sign around his neck. He passes the intersection where women and teenagers had been forced to fire anti-tank rockets at Sherman tanks. He passes the ash and the broken glass and the collapsed facades of 10 days of urban combat that left 1,600 German soldiers and civilians dead or wounded, that put 3,500 Germans into American prisoner cages, and that killed or wounded more than 1,000 American soldiers who had come a very long way from home to fight a war that was already decided before the first shot was fired in Aschaffenburg. He walks up to Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks. He salutes. Sparks does not salute back. He simply looks at him. And in that silence, every soldier of the 45th Infantry Division standing in the rubble of that square understands exactly what their commander is thinking. This is the man who hanged his own lieutenant for suggesting that human lives mattered more than a lost cause. This is the man who put children in the streets with weapons. This is the man who fought to the last inch of stone and now stands here alive, uniform intact, medals in place, offering the very surrender he executed other men for whispering about. Lamberth will be tried by an American military tribunal, not for war crimes against American soldiers. That is not the charge they can make stick in the chaos of a war still officially ongoing. He will be tried for murder, for the killing of Lieutenant Hammond, for the execution of German civilians who attempted to surrender their city to save their own lives. He will be sentenced to death. That sentence will later be commuted. Emil Lamberth will die a free man decades after the war, having outlived nearly every American soldier he spent 10 days trying to kill. 9 days after Lamberth's surrender, on the 12th of April, 1945, 3 American generals stand together at the gate of a place called Ohrdruf. Their names are Patton, Bradley, and Eisenhower. Ohrdruf is a subcamp of the Buchenwald concentration camp system, located in the forests of Thuringia in central Germany. The 4th Armored Division of Patton's Third Army liberated it 3 days earlier on the 9th of April. The soldiers who entered first did not know what they were walking into. Nobody had told them. There were no briefings that could have prepared them, because there was no language yet for what they were about to see, no framework, no category in the human mind organized enough to receive it cleanly and make sense of it. Eisenhower has insisted on coming himself. He has sent word to Washington and London that the senior Allied commanders will personally inspect the camp. He has said to the officers around him that he wants to see it with his own eyes, that he wants to be a witness, that he understands with a clarity that goes beyond military calculation that the world will need witnesses. The 3 generals walk in together. They walked past the gallows, still standing, still functional. They walked past the whipping blocks, the wooden frames where prisoners were bent over and beaten, the wood still stained dark in the grain where the stain will not come out no matter how many years pass. They walked to the pits. The pits are filled with bodies, naked, arranged in layers the way you would stack objects if space were limited and the objects had ceased to matter. Some of the dead have been shot. Some show signs of beatings that went on longer than the body could survive. Some simply starved, their frames reduced to something that the American soldiers standing at the edge of the pit cannot immediately recognize as human, cannot immediately connect to the word person, cannot immediately process as the remains of men who once had names and families and the ordinary interior lives of human beings. Patton turns away. He walks to the side of a nearby shed. And there, in front of Eisenhower and Bradley and a small group of aides and military photographers, George S. Patton, the man of ivory-handled pistols and profane speeches, the man who has spent 41 years convincing himself and everyone around him that nothing could shake him, vomits into the corner of the building. Omar Bradley will write about this moment decades later in his memoir. He will write that he had never, in all the years he served alongside Patton, seen him look the way he looked at Ordroof. He will write that Eisenhower walked every inch of that camp in silence, his jaw set, his face a controlled mask over something that had no controlled expression. Eisenhower will later issue an order that every American soldier not currently engaged at the front line must visit a concentration camp. He will explain his reasoning in one sentence. We are told the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for. Now, at least he will know what he is fighting against. That night, Patton writes in his diary. He describes the bodies. He describes the smell, which he says is unlike anything he has encountered in 41 years of soldiering. He writes that he ordered the mayor of the nearest German town, along with the man's wife, to be escorted to Ordroof and made to walk through it. That night, the mayor and his wife returned to their home. They hang themselves. Patton records this without comment. He writes it down and closes the diary and goes to sleep in his command vehicle somewhere in the forests of Thuringia. And the war continues. Now comes the thing that almost no account of Patton, no biography, no documentary, no Hollywood film has ever placed at the center of his story where it belongs. The thing that changes what everything else means. Go back 3 months. Back to the 1st of January, 1945. The Battle of the Bulge is winding down. Patton's relief of Bastogne has already happened. The German offensive in the Ardennes has spent itself and failed. The front is beginning to stabilize. And near a small Belgian village called Chinon, just outside Bastogne, in a field covered in January snow, soldiers of the 11th Armored Division, Patton's own men, line up approximately 60 German prisoners of war. The Germans are unarmed. They have surrendered. They are standing in a field in the snow with their hands visible, which is the only thing a surrendering soldier can do. The Americans shoot them all. The men pulling the triggers are not monsters. They are not sadists. They are boys from Iowa and Michigan and West Virginia who 2 weeks earlier heard what happened at Malmedy, 12 miles away, where SS troops of Kampfgruppe Pieper gathered more than 100 American prisoners at a crossroads and opened fire. 84 of them died in the snow. Some survived only by lying still among the dead. The Americans at Chinon remember Malmedy the way you remember something that has burned itself into a place below memory, below thought, below the reach of any order or regulation or law of war. They line the Germans up in the snow, and they answer murder with murder. There is no full investigation. There are no courts-martial. The Army files a report, and the report disappears into the administrative machinery of a war that is producing atrocities faster than it can process them. On the 4th of January 1945, General George S. Patton writes one line in his diary about what his men have done. Some 50 Germans were killed by our troops. I hope we can conceal this. 50 words, one sentence of acknowledgement, and one sentence of intent. The intent to hide it, the intent to protect his men, or his army's reputation, or perhaps simply his own carefully constructed image as the commander of the finest fighting force in the American military, from the knowledge that those men were capable of the same act they were fighting to stop. The greatest American general of the war knew his men had committed a war crime, and he chose silence. This is not a story about villains. That is the point. That is what makes it harder than the version with villains. The men at Chinon remembered Malmedy. The teenager behind the white flag in Bavaria had been told his family would be shot if he did not fire. The SS men hanging German soldiers from lampposts were following orders from a government that had made terror the only available instrument of policy. Emil Lamberth believed genuinely and completely in something that the outcome of the war was in the process of proving false. Hans Prutzmann built an army from children because that was all that was left to build it from. None of this excuses any of it, but all of it explains it. And the distinction between those two things, between explanation and excuse, is exactly the distance between a war crime and a war. And it is a distance that gets smaller and smaller the longer a war goes on and the more it costs the people fighting it. The war ends on the 8th of May, 1945. 6 years and 1 day after it began in Poland on the 1st of September 1939, the German High Command signs the instrument of unconditional surrender, first at Rheims in France and then again at Berlin. The werewolves do not fight on. There is no insurgency. There is no guerrilla campaign in the forests and mountains of the occupied Reich. The most feared secret weapon of the dying Nazi state simply stops. Look almost orderly by comparison. Aschaffenburg does not belong to Patton. It is in the sector of General Alexander Patch's 7th Army, but it is close enough to Patton's lines that his staff receives the reports every few hours. And what those reports describe does not sound like the final weeks of a losing war. It sounds like madness. The city is being defended by a Wehrmacht major named Emil Lamberth. He is approximately 45 years old. He is a veteran of the First World War. He has served in the German military for most of his adult life, and he believes, with the absolute and unshakable conviction of a man who has organized his entire identity around a single idea, in Adolf Hitler and the final victory of the German people. Hitler has designated Aschaffenburg a Festung, a fortress, a city to be defended to the last stone, the last bullet, and the last man. Lamberth intends to obey. When his own officers come to him privately and argue that the city cannot be held, that the American forces surrounding it are too strong, that the civilian population is suffering, that a negotiated surrender would save hundreds of lives on both sides, Lamberth listens. He gives them his full attention. He lets them finish making their case, and then he has one of them arrested. The officer's name is Lieutenant Heinz Hamann. He is young. He has a family. He wanted to end the killing and go home. Lamberth convenes a drumhead court-martial in the ruins of a building that was once a civic office. The proceedings take less than an hour. The verdict is predetermined. Lamberth sentences Hamann to death for defeatism and cowardice in the face of the enemy. And then he does something that the American infantrymen who eventually fight their way into Aschaffenburg will never entirely forget. He has Hamann hanged in the public square, and he leaves the body there for days. Around the dead man's neck, a cardboard sign written in careful German script. War ein Feigling. Wollte die Stadt übergeben. He was a coward. He wanted to surrender the city. The battle for Aschaffenburg lasts 10 days. 10 days in which women are pressed into service firing Panzerfaust rockets at Sherman tanks in the narrow streets. 10 days in which Hitler Youth boys of 14 and 15 throw grenades at vehicles from upper floor windows. 10 days in which ordinary residents who hang white sheets from their windows in the hope of ending the killing find SS men coming through their doors minutes later to tear the sheets down and, in several documented cases, shoot the people who hung them. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks commands a regiment of the 45th Infantry Division fighting through the city. He is 27 years old. He grew up on a ranch in New Mexico. He has fought in Sicily and at Anzio and through the mountains of Italy and up through France into Germany. He has seen a great deal of war. He will write later in his memoir that Aschaffenburg was the worst urban combat he experienced in the entire war. Worse than anything in Italy. Worse than anything he could have imagined. His men learn in Aschaffenburg what Patton's men are learning in Bavaria. That when the enemy has turned its own officers into executed examples. When the flag of surrender means nothing. When the boy in the doorway may be carrying a grenade. when the old woman in the window may be covering a sniper. The calculus of mercy becomes impossible to perform in real time. And the only thing that keeps moving forward is the decision, made somewhere below the level of conscious thought, to keep moving forward. By the 7th of April, as the fighting in Aschaffenburg is winding down, Patton writes 2 sentences in his diary. 2 sentences about everything his men are going through. 2 sentences that his biographers will underline and argue over and return to for decades. We are losing too many men to this cowardice. But do not be mistaken. Most of the Germans surrender in good faith. He is 59 years old. He has been a soldier for 41 years. He has seen the full range of what human beings are capable of doing to each other. And even Patton, cannot look at what is happening in these German villages in the spring of 1945 and feel anything but tired. Now here is the thing that almost no account of these final weeks includes. The thing that sits at the center of everything else like a stone at the bottom of a well, Radio Werewolf, the terrifying insurgent force, the nightmare that is keeping German civilians from surrendering, that is driving SS execution squads through the countryside, that is compelling 14-year-old boys to fire rifles they cannot aim at tanks they cannot stop. It does not really exist. The Office of Strategic Services, American military intelligence, has been tracking the werewolf operation all winter. Their files, declassified decades after the war and available now at the National Archives, tell a story that is almost the opposite of what Radio Werewolf is broadcasting every night. There are not thousands of trained werewolf operatives embedded in German cities. There are not legions of fanatical Hitler Youth killers waiting in cellars and forest hideouts. At its maximum strength, at the absolute peak of Preutzmann's operation, there are perhaps 200 people who have been through any form of werewolf training. Most of them will never fire a single shot in anger. Many of them will simply remove their armbands and walk home when the war ends. The werewolf is not an army. The werewolf is a radio transmitter and a man named Goebbels who understands that an enemy that believes it is surrounded by wolves will behave as if it is surrounded by wolves, even when the forest is empty. And the proof of this, the confirmation that strips away every layer of mythology, is a single event. One event, confirmed by post-war investigation, that represents the entire operational output of the most feared secret weapon of the dying Third Reich. Easter Sunday, the 25th of March, 1945, the ancient city of Aachen, the first German city liberated by American forces back in October of 1944. It has been under Allied administration for 5 months. The war is, for the people of Aachen, already over. Franz Oppenhoff is 42 years old. He is a Catholic lawyer. He is a quiet man, a decent man, a man who opposed the Nazi regime at personal risk throughout the war. The American military government appointed him mayor of Aachen after liberation because they needed someone competent and trustworthy to help run a shattered city. And Oppenhoff was both those things. On Easter Sunday, a car pulls up outside his house in the evening. 6 people get out. 2 of them are teenagers. One is a young Dutch SS volunteer, and one of them is a young woman in her early 20s named Ilse Hirsch, trained in parachuting and committed to the Nazi cause to the last, dropped behind American lines specifically for this mission. They ring the bell. They tell the housekeeper they are Luftwaffe pilots who have been shot down and need shelter for the night. It is a plausible story. It is the kind of story a decent man, a Christian man, answers with an open door. Oppenhoff comes downstairs in his slippers. A teenager in a Hitler Youth uniform raises a Walther pistol. He fires once. Franz Oppenhoff falls dead in his own hallway on Easter Sunday. His killers disappear into the night. That is it. That is the complete operational record of Werewolf. 1 confirmed assassination. 1 decent man in slippers. 6 people who drove up in a car and rang a doorbell. Ilse Hirsch will live until 1991, a free woman in West Germany, having spent not 1 day in prison for the killing. Hans Preutzmann's great underground army, the nightmare force that has been howling from the radio every night for a month, the weapon that has terrified German civilians into fighting and dying in cities that were already lost, amounts to 6 people, 1 murder, and a transmitter in the dark. But the damage is done because Goebbels understood something that military planners rarely account for. You do not need to actually do a thing to make people believe you are doing it. You only need to say it loudly enough and repeat it often enough, and make sure that the people listening are already frightened enough to fill in the details themselves. The white flag ambushes are still happening, not because Berlin ordered them, not because Kreutzmann trained anyone to conduct them, but because old men and teenagers listening to Radio Werewolf in cold kitchens and damp cellars have been told that surrender is treason, that peace is cowardice, that the SS will come for their families if they put down their rifles. And some of them believe it, and some of them fire. And somewhere on a road in Bavaria, a 22-year-old sergeant from Ohio keys his radio and says one word, and the war goes on. The war that everyone knows is over goes on, day by day, village by village, white flag by white flag, because a radio station in the dark has convinced enough frightened people that the wolves are real. They are not. But the boys' dying state simply stops. The men and boys who were trained at Schloss Hulkrath take off their armbands and become ordinary Germans again, or try to. And the forests they were supposed to haunt remain quiet. On the 21st of May, in a British internment camp at Lüneburg, Hans Kreutzmann, the architect of Operation Werewolf, the old executioner of Ukraine, bites down on a cyanide capsule he had concealed somewhere on his person and dies on the floor of his cell before the guards can force his mouth open. He is 43 years old. He will be buried in an unmarked location. No monument, no grave marker, no record of where his body was put in the ground. The wolf is buried with the man who invented it. Patton does not handle peace well. He is a soldier without a war, and this turns out to be, for him, a condition nearly as dangerous as combat. He argues with his superiors. He gives interviews he should not give. He says things privately and semi-publicly about the Soviet Union and about the wisdom of the Allied victory that his commanders find alarming and his government finds embarrassing. In October of 1945, he is quietly relieved of command of the Third Army. He is given a different assignment, a historical one, documenting the war. He understands what this means. He is 59 years old. He has been a soldier for 41 years. He is being put on a shelf. On the 9th of December 1945, a cold Sunday morning near Mannheim, Patton is being driven to a pheasant hunt. His Cadillac staff car is moving slowly along a road that has been partially cleared of wartime debris. A 2.5-ton American Army truck, driven by a young corporal, makes a left turn across the path of the Cadillac. The impact is slow. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of collision that ends up in history books for its own sake. Everyone else in the car walks away with bruises. Patton is thrown forward. His head strikes the metal partition separating the driver's compartment from the rear passenger area. His third and fourth cervical vertebrae fracture and dislocate. He is paralyzed from the neck down instantly and completely. There is no assassination. Every theory that has been constructed in the decades since, the NKVD hit squad, the OSS operation, the deliberate act by forces who feared what Patton might say or do in peacetime, none of them are supported by the evidence. The evidence supports exactly what it looks like. An old general in a staff car on a cleared road, and a young corporal in a truck who turned left at the wrong moment. That is all it was. Patton spends 12 days in a hospital in Heidelberg. He can move his eyes. He can speak faintly in a whisper. He cannot move anything below his neck. His wife Beatrice flies from Boston to be with him. She sits beside his bed every day. He tells her in a whisper that this is a hell of a way for a soldier to die. On the 21st of December 1945, at 10 minutes to 6 in the evening, a blood clot reaches his heart. George Smith Patton Jr. dies in his sleep. He is buried at the American Military Cemetery at Ham in Luxembourg. Not in a separate section for generals, not with a special monument or an oversized marker. He is buried, at his own explicit request, in a plain grave in a straight row, with the ordinary soldiers of his Third Army. At the head of the row, facing his men, the way a commander faces his men. His grave marker is white marble. It is identical in size and shape to every other marker in the cemetery, his rank, his name, his unit, his date of death. Nothing more. That is where he lies today, in a field of white crosses that stretches to the horizon in every direction, surrounded by the men he commanded and the men he sent and the men who did not come back from places like Hammelburg and Aschaffenburg and the snow outside Chennon. And now, the last thing, the thing that closes the circle. Within weeks of the German surrender, the same American counterintelligence officers who had been tracking werewolf operatives through the forests of Thuringia began doing something else with the men they found. They began hiring them, former SS intelligence officers, former Wehrmacht signalsmen, former enemies who 6 months before had been organizing the ambushes behind white flags and running the execution squads that hunted surrendering German soldiers through the countryside. Men who knew how to build networks, men who knew the terrain, men who knew the Soviet order of battle and the Soviet intelligence methods and the names and locations of Soviet assets inside Germany. The Cold War was beginning. The Soviets were the new enemy. And men who knew how to run saboteurs and informants behind enemy lines were suddenly very useful again, regardless of what they had done to earn that knowledge. One of the first men brought into this arrangement was a Wehrmacht intelligence officer named Reinhard Gehlen. He would go on to run West German intelligence for 2 decades. His organization, staffed heavily with men who had served the Nazi state in various capacities, became one of the most significant American intelligence assets of the early Cold War. The wolves were not exterminated. Many of them put on new suits, took new names, and went back to work. For us, there is a widow somewhere. She is very old now, 90-something, maybe older. She lives in a small house in Ohio or Alabama or Pennsylvania. She has a photograph on the mantelpiece of a young man in uniform, a boy really, 20 years old, 21, standing somewhere in Europe in the spring of 1945 with the particular expression of someone who has been at war long enough to stop pretending it is an adventure. Every May, she puts a flower on his grave. He was one of the 259 men of Task Force Bomb who did not come back. Or he was one of the more than 1,000 Americans killed or wounded in the rubble of Aschaffenburg. Or he was one of the 84 men machine-gunned at Malmedy. Or he was one of the boys who came home and never spoke about what they did at Chinon in the January snow. The white flags of the last spring of the war are gone. The werewolf transmitter at Nauen went silent in May of 1945 and was eventually dismantled. Aschaffenburg was rebuilt. The lamppost where Heinz Hammond's body hung is gone, replaced, part of a city that has spent 80 years becoming something other than the place Felix Sparks fought through street by street. Buchenwald is a museum now. Ohrdruf has a memorial. Patton's Cadillac sits behind glass in the Patton Museum of Leadership at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And the boys who were there, the ones still with us, are 98 years old, 99, 100. And every year there are fewer of them. And every year the distance between what they saw and what we know grows a little wider and a little harder to close. What Patton did when German snipers used fake surrender flags is this. He did what commanders do. He made a decision. He applied a rule that already existed and had existed for 38 years, a rule that said that perfidy, the weaponization of mercy, voids the protections of the laws of war. He enforced it with the only instruments available to him, which were Sherman tanks and high-explosive rounds, and the tired, frightened, angry young men who operated them. And it worked in the narrow tactical sense that such things can be said to work. The ambushes became less frequent. The column kept moving. The war in Europe ended on the 8th of May. But the other answer, the one that sits underneath the tactical answer and does not go away when the tactical problem is solved, is more complicated. What Patton did is what all of them did. All of them on all sides, in all the villages and fields and city streets of that last terrible spring. They made decisions in the dark with incomplete information and exhausted judgment and the knowledge that the wrong choice meant the death of the man next to them. Some of those decisions were correct under any framework a reasonable person could construct. Some were not. Most existed in the space between, where the framework itself had broken down and there was nothing left to navigate by except instinct and fear and the desperate human need to come home alive. They were not heroes in the way the newsreels described them. They were not villains in the way the comfortable post-war conscience sometimes needed them to be. They were men, tired men in dirty uniforms, making impossible choices in the ruins of a civilization that had chosen to destroy itself. And they carried those choices home. And they lived with them. And most of them never talked about them. And now most of them are gone. If one of them is in your family, your father, your grandfather, your uncle, who always changed the subject when Europe came up, who kept the photographs in a shoebox at the back of the closet and never explained why, who sat at the Thanksgiving table every year for the rest of his life with something behind his eyes that nobody at the table ever directly asked about. Sit with him, ask him, listen, and listen even more carefully to what he does not say. Because what he does not say is the part that cost him the most. And it is the part that deserves to be remembered most carefully of all.